The United States Navy operates the original, highly successful model for small nuclear reactors. They maintain a massive maritime fleet, keeping nearly 100 small reactors operating around the globe. This system maintains a pristine safety record for two specific reasons. First, the ocean provides an infinite, reliable supply of cooling water. Second, the military enforces strict, centralized oversight and absolute operational discipline. Now, a new global ambition has taken hold. Extract this technology, package it as small modular reactors, and deploy it onto dry land for commercial use. Moving these reactors from the sea to the civilian landscape trades a proven safety model for much more complex variables. The intense push for domestic commercial reactors is largely driven by modern data centers and microchip manufacturers, who are desperate for massive, continuous power. To meet that demand, the U.S. issued Executive Order 14301 in May 2025. This policy slashes environmental reviews to fast-track pilot reactors into operation by the summer of 2026. While the U.S. focuses internally, China is aggressively pushing outward, exporting reactor models like the Linglong one to developing nations along its Belt and Road Initiative. The industry's marketing pitch is highly persuasive today. They are selling these reactors as cheap, modular, off-the-shelf commercial energy commodities. Treating lethal nuclear technology as a plug-and-play appliance scatters highly sensitive infrastructure across a volatile globe. Every single one of these reactors requires enriched uranium fuel to operate. The engineering gap between the 3 to 5% enriched fuel needed for civilian power and the 90% purity needed for a weapon is simply a matter of how long the uranium spins inside a centrifuge. The International Atomic Energy Agency polices this boundary globally, but they are not a global police force. They can only inspect locations they are invited to. Without permission, inspectors have no legal authority to force their way in. Mass-producing thousands of small reactors will quickly overwhelm this already restricted inspection system, turning global nuclear oversight into a statistical nightmare. Many developing nations buying China's Belt and Road reactors lack their own domestic nuclear supply chains. As this flowchart shows, buying a Chinese reactor structurally locks a nation into relying on Beijing for enriched fuel, mechanical maintenance, and the disposal of radioactive waste. That deep dependency lasts for the entire 60 to 80-year operational lifespan of the reactor. Western nations are struggling to counter this influence because their domestic construction costs are much higher and their internal regulations are significantly stricter. These reactor exports act as geopolitical tethers, designed to lock the global south into Beijing's orbit for nearly a century. Despite being marketed as micro, these reactors still generate massive heat and require immense, continuous volumes of water to stay cool. This satellite image of Fukushima details exactly what happens when natural disasters cripple a reactor's cooling systems. Without water, the core melts down. Earthquakes and tsunamis used to be the primary concern. Now, extreme heat and drought are emerging as a frequent, silent threat to cooling systems. During the intense European heat waves of 2025 and 2026, France was forced to completely shut down several modern reactors. The local river water had become too hot to safely absorb the heat from the core. Imagine that exact scenario playing out with modular reactors scattered across developing nations, where disaster response infrastructure is weak and extreme droughts are becoming the norm. The world is rushing to build small reactors to fight climate change. Yet, our warming planet is actively destroying the specific environmental conditions required to keep those exact reactors safe. Governments and energy corporations are heavily promoting the idea that these reactors are essentially large AA batteries, clean power sources that can be dropped anywhere to solve an energy crisis. Safe nuclear power relies on immense institutional, legal, and environmental stability. Worldwide, those resources are rapidly vanishing. Treating unstable environments as testing grounds for commercial nuclear technology creates extreme vulnerabilities. Shrinking the reactor does not shrink the danger. Instead, placing hundreds of reactors in diverse locations creates hundreds of new points where things can go wrong. As deregulation and international exports accelerate, we have to recognize a basic physical truth. The technology may be modular, but the consequences of a failure remain absolute.
When you think of, keeping the lights on, weapons of mass destruction don't usually come to mind. But the terrifying reality of nuclear energy is that the line between civilian electricity and weapons-grade material is really just a matter of time. And, well, a few more centrifuge spins. I mean, enriching uranium to like 3 or 5% gives you power, but pushing it to 90%.
Pushing it to 90% gives you a bomb. Yeah, mechanically speaking, it is the exact same process. And that shared technological DNA is really the root of the entire global anxiety around nuclear power today.
Right. Which is exactly why we're doing this custom deep dive for you today.
Yeah.
We're looking at a huge stack of international treaties, climate data, geopolitical analyses, and a pretty pivotal May 2025 U.S. executive order. Our mission here is to figure out who is actually winning the invisible war over this exact tipping point.
Yeah, and to understand that war, you really have to look at the global rulebook first. That's the Non-Proliferation Treaty, or the NPT. It set up this grand bargain where nations are fully allowed to develop peaceful nuclear power. But
they have to accept some really strict oversight to get it.
exactly, they agree to strict rules to prove they aren't building a weapon.
So reading through these treaties, it's clear the IAEA isn't just like checking math. They act like the world's most aggressive bank auditors. How do they actually enforce that on the ground?
Well, they implement what are called comprehensive safeguards. These account for every single gram of uranium. We're talking 247 camera feeds streaming directly to their headquarters in Vienna. And under something called the Additional Protocol, they get complimentary access.
Which means they can launch no notice, surprise inspections, right? Like just showing up to swab facilities for radioactive isotopes.
Yep, exactly. No warning at all.
And if a nation ignores this oversight, the UN Security Council is forced to step in with severe economic sanctions, embargoes, and financial isolation. But wait, I have to push back a little here. That just doesn't completely make sense to me. The US is essentially a global superpower when it comes to nuclear threats. Why are they just sitting on their hands while rogue facilities spin up? I mean, why can't they legally force these places to shut down?
It comes down to structural gridlock. The U.S. is legally powerless if a country hasn't actually broken international law. Think about the outliers here. India, Pakistan, and Israel never even signed the NPT. North Korea signed it and then, simply withdrew.
Oh, wow. And then you have nations like Iran restricting that additional protocol we talked about, which effectively blindfolds the IAEA's inspectors.
Right. So because military and legal coercion are so gridlocked, the real battle for nuclear dominance has completely shifted to commercial export, specifically small modular reactors, or SMRs.
Okay, and this is where it gets really interesting. China is aggressively exporting their SMRs, like the Linglong one, to developing nations through their Belt and Road Initiative. Looking at this strategy, this is basically the ultimate printer and ink business model.
That's a perfect analogy. Buying a smaller, cheaper reactor isn't just a one-off purchase. It locks a developing nation into a 60 to 80-year geopolitical dependency on the supplier.
Yeah, think about what that leverage means for you if you're the buyer. You get the reactor, sure, but you need the supplier for the enriched fuel, the specialized technical maintenance, and eventually the radioactive waste disposal.
Precisely. Once you buy in, you are locked out of competing markets, and you're tied to that supplier's geopolitical ecosystem for nearly a century.
But dropping these highly complex SMRs into developing regions introduces a massive physical vulnerability. And we're not talking about terrorism here, but the climate. Extreme heat, what some of our sources refer to as Nangnong, is becoming the industry's Achilles heel.
Yeah, we actually saw this play out during the massive heat waves of 2025 and 2026. France literally lost 7 gigawatts of nuclear power because the river water they rely on to cool the reactors became just too hot to use safely.
Without destroying the local ecosystem.
Right, exactly. The water was too hot to cool the plant without boiling the river life.
And SMRs still need a massive heat sink, usually a river. So if a developing nation buys one but lacks a robust secondary power grid to run backup cooling pumps during a severe drought, the water boils off. And as Fukushima proved, losing that backup power puts you immediately in meltdown territory.
Exactly. You are placing a technology that requires flawless emergency infrastructure into regions that might not have it, right as global temperatures peak. That is a terrifying combination.
It really is. And the U.S. has realized they are falling way behind in this race. To counter foreign influence, the White House issued an executive order in May 2025 to cut red tape. They are fast-tracking domestic SMR testing outside of traditional national labs.
Yeah, they want these pilots to achieve criticality by July 2026. Criticality meaning a sustained, self-supporting nuclear reaction. It is a desperate sprint to reclaim the nuclear supply chain before those 60-year global dependencies are cemented by competing powers.
Wow. Well, we started today by talking about the dangerously thin line between civilian power and a weapon. But if climate change makes traditional water-cooled reactors too risky to operate in developing nations, here is a final provocative thought for you to mull over.
What's that?
As SMRs become the ultimate geopolitical chess pieces, are we about to see a massive geopolitical race to lock down the world's limited supplies of alternative coolants like liquid sodium?